Hi, Lauren.
Hi, Shannon.
Welcome back to What They Don't Say, the podcast where we talk about consent,
Relationships,
trauma,
education,
sexual assault,
prevention,
and everything in between. So what are we talking about today, Lauren, specifically?
Well, guys, so we're going to be taking a little bit of a step back. We've been talking about a lot of different things on here, but we really want to talk about consent and what consent is.
Zoom out a little bit on this stuff.
And also just like talking about what it means, and then also how our education system has really failed us on this topic and has really failed us when it comes to sex ed and sexual assault, and how in order to create prevention, we need to be better about this. But then also kind of taking some case studies and looking at how institutions have been enabling these actions and enabling rape culture, and kind of just diving into what that has looked like and why it's just all so goddamn fucked up.
And why consent is hot.
And sexy.
Woo! Yeah.
My hair is so tangled. Do you see this?
Lauren does not brush her hair.
Guys. Oh my god. I think that this conversation has like two different parts, right? Like when we're talking about, there's like that question of like, what is it? And I also think we like talk about it. It's like, what is sexual assault? What is rape? Like why are they different? How are they different? And like, I think that it's interesting because they can be different from like a legal perspective, right?
There's like actual different laws in each state about sexual assault and about rape.
Right.
And what each one is.
And like some of them are like a lot worse than others. Like some states, how they like define sexual assault kind of pigeonholes people in a way that it's like makes it harder to convict a perpetrator in court because of the actual definition that certain states use. And so that's really interesting.
Like it's the precedent is higher, I guess, like for evidence, is what you're saying?
Well, that is like one thing, right? Like how do you in court, like how does the jury have to find someone guilty? Like what are the parameters around that? Mm-hmm. Like is it like unanimous? I mean, for our trial it was
I think they needed like 6 out of the 8 jury members or something like
beyond
that.
unreasonable doubt.
Yeah.
Beyond reasonable doubt. Beyond unreasonable doubt?
Beyond a reasonable doubt.
But there's also like just the way that some states define like rape and things like that, or like how the military defines it, or even how an institution defines it can play a huge role in how court cases play out or how they even like don't play out. And so I think that's like really interesting to look at and understand. And that is like one whole perspective of it. But for the sake of today, I don't think we should necessarily be like breaking down all these legal definitions because there's so many and they're so different for where you are. And it's something to definitely pay attention to for where you live. And it's something to be aware of and educated on. But I think from just a digestible standpoint, we kind of just want to talk about it in the way of like, you know, I feel like I have had a conversation with like a lot of like guys and stuff like that who aren't very educated on this topic, and they literally don't fucking understand what it means for someone to be assaulted. And like they like might think that, oh, like, you know, how do you define that? Or like, what does that like mean for you? Like if you're drinking, is that automatically assault? Like, you know what I mean? Like, mm-hmm. I think there's just a lot of like these weird gray areas that people don't really understand.
So as a whole, sexual assault is any unwanted sexual contact without your consent. So, you know, in order to understand sexual assault, we need to understand what consent is. Consent is an overwhelming like willingness to participate in a sexual act, whether that's like touching, kissing, sex with penetration, all of that stuff. And so like I was reading an article earlier today that was talking about enthusiastic consent, which is kind of a new term these days. And rather than it being this like, oh, I'm looking for the absence of a no, you want to look for the presence of a yes. So this means like a frequent checking in with your partner, especially if it's a new partner. Like it's so vital that you are saying like, hey, is this okay? Like, I know we did X, Y, and Z yesterday, but today you might not be interested in having sex or doing this sort of position or whatever. So I think like, you know, we start at consent in order to get to sexual assault.
And I think that is like, I think that's a good place for us to start too. You know, like what does consent look like? And I think that is an area where things get like really blurred. And like, I know in like court and trial and stuff like that, like they like use consent as a way to like, they like use it against you in a way. And they're like, well, you didn't say like no loud enough, or you didn't scream, or like whatever it might be. But that is not the extent of like what consent means. You know what I mean? Like consent isn't just like, or like the lack of consent isn't you just screaming. Like that's not what that means.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like that is like ensuring that the person that you are engaging with like any sexual act with, they want that and they want to like be there. But I think that like there's also this weird kind of idea of like, it's not like fun or sexy.
I was just about to say that.
Yeah, to like ask someone to like, if they can kiss you or if they can like take your shirt off. But like, I think that
consent is hot.
Consent is hot. And like,
and it can be hot.
And it can be hot. Okay. Like if I am like hooking up with someone and they like stop and they look at me and they're like, can I take your shirt off? Like, I'm like, well, depends on who it is and like what's going on. But if I want that, I'm like, oh my God, like, yes, like you are so hot and sexy. And the fact that you stopped, you took that moment to like look me in the eyes and ask me a question to ensure that I am comfortable. And when you are comfortable and your partner is comfortable, sex is just so much better.
Absolutely.
And so I think we need to get rid of that idea that like it's like not sexy to ask those questions and ask for consent, because it is. And like even if it's like those little things of like, you know, like both of us have struggled with physical touch and like things like that.
I hate being touched.
Yeah. And like a lot of people feel that way. And that's like,
no hugs, please. Like if someone's like, when I'm meeting someone and they're like, oh, I'm a hugger, that's like,
you're like, no,
please, no, that's my worst nightmare. But anyways.
No, like, but yeah. And that's not even just like a trauma response. Like some people just are not like touchy people, and that's okay. But even for things like that, like having that awareness in your mind of like, okay, I want this, but that doesn't mean this person wants that too. Mm-hmm. Even if it's just like kiss someone or whatever it may be. Like, I mean, have you ever had a guy just like, he's just like looking at you and you like really like him and he's like, can I kiss you? And you're just
yeah, you know, it's epic.
Like, yes, like it is attractive, but also it creates communication between your partner, and that is so, so, so vitally important. And I know that like these lines can get really blurred, especially if people are drinking or like they're just not as aware of their faculties and like what is going on and stuff. But like that is just another layer of like, if you are hooking up with someone and they are drunk, their consent, you have to be really, really, really aware of that and like careful with that.
It's actually in like laws, you have to be able to consent. So in order to be able to consent, you have to be of age. So, you know, you can't be 12 and having sex with somebody in their 20s. That's illegal. So you have to be of age to consent, and you also have to be of mental capacity to consent. So if you are absolutely inebriated or incredibly drunk, those are synonymous, then you can't consent because you're too messed up to do so. So it's like, not only do you have to get consent, but the other person has to be able to consent. In order for them to be able to consent, they have to be in the right state of mind and be of age. I was just, when you were talking about this like consent is hot thing, I was thinking about how if you're hooking up with someone, and especially a new person, and like you're you know, man is trying his best. He is doing the things to try to make you feel good. And there's probably, I imagine, I'm not a man, but I imagine there's a lot of stress that's kind of involved with hooking up with a woman for the first time. It's like, I don't know their body. I haven't done this with them before. You know, it's a new person. But like, imagine if you could look at consent as also a way to know if your partner is feeling good. So it's not just a, yes, I want to do this, but it also can be a check-in of like, does this feel good? So it's, is this okay? How do you feel about this? And does it make you feel good? Right? So it doesn't also, like, it doesn't just have to be about, are you okay with this? It's like, I want to make you feel good as well. Which once again, just kind of goes back to this whole consent is hot thing. Like it really is. Yeah, that was the end of my thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like where part of the issue comes in here is that like guys, especially, and girls, like when you're hooking up with someone, you are in a state of mind where your awareness kind of leaves. Mm-hmm. And you're not thinking straight. You might not even really be thinking about your partner. Like maybe you are just like, I want to get my dick wet so bad. And like, that is all you are goddamn thinking about.
Or vice versa. Like a woman just being like, I want this man inside of me. Like that's the thing.
And you don't take that time. And I think that there is some sort of societal, cultural idea that like men have the right to do that.
Or a woman. I just think it's really important to also talk about men getting assaulted here.
I agree, but I'm saying it in this way because like for the majority of, society, like men have had like ownership over women.
True.
And so that's what I'm talking about. Okay. I'm talking about this idea of like men thinking that like they can do whatever they want and like they can get away with it and they have every right to have sex with you.
Women are property. It's a saying. I didn't come up with that. Okay. Just to clarify, that was not something I came up with. It's just like, it's an actual saying that like I've had friends say. I've even said it like as part of joke before, but in reality, it's like, why am I actually making that okay? Like, it's not okay.
Yeah.
But so you're saying society as a whole, especially like historically, it's women are property.
Right. And so I think that like there is still, and like this is an argument that I have heard, like not because they personally believe this, but like I've taken like a lot of like ethics classes and like philosophy classes and things like that, where we talk about rape, we talk about like porn and like things like that and looking at like the ethics surrounding that. And there is this like argument of like in nature, like the male species is like that's what they're supposed to do, is like have sex with women. And so because of that, naturally, like they think they have the right to do that. And I have actually heard that argued, and it's so interesting, but like fucked up. But I think it's true. And I think that is why we have, rape culture and like locker room talk and how it gets enabled when one person has that mindset and then there's like they're surrounded by a bunch of their bros and then that like enhances their mindset. And then there's like the idea of like protecting your brother or like whatever it may be, protecting your teammate. And then all of this stuff gets exploded and like so much worse.
And normalized. Like when did it become cool to not respect women? Like I think it is so cool.
I think that like it used to
just be fine to not respect them.
Yeah, because, we didn't even get the right to vote until like
yesterday. But like really, because like with my ex-boyfriend, we'd have like a date night or something, and then we'd come back and all the guys would be like, oh my gosh, like that's like, oh my gosh, you're such a simp, like as a bad thing, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you did this for your girlfriend, like that's so gay. Like they would always say shit like that. And now I'm like, wait, isn't it so much cooler to just build a woman up and like not support disrespect her? Like,
yeah,
why is it cool to disrespect a woman? Like, why can't you just be like, yeah, I love women's rights, I support women, they should be able to do everything that men can? Why is it this thing of it's not cool to build women up anymore?
Could be like a weird like pride thing. It could be like power dynamics. Like yes, I know I have come across a lot of guys who get very, very, very threatened by a woman who has like an opinion.
Heaven
or
forbid.
Is smart or like wants to have some badass career or like whatever it might be. and like they feel like threatened by that because like that's their job, you know what I mean? Like they're supposed to be the ones that have the fucking voice and have the job and make the money, and like it's just like that's not how it is anymore. And I feel like for some reason there's like a default going on there.
So like with it kind of becoming the norm of like disrespecting women, I do think there are a fair amount of groups in society that like specific groups that enable this sort of behavior where it becomes the topic is always like, be a man, do this, like, oh yeah, go fuck her, fuck all these women, like fuck as many as you possibly can, do this, do that. But like, heaven forbid you actually have respect for women. And I think some of those groups in particular are fraternities, I would say, as well as like some military stuff. But specifically, fraternities heavily kind of promote this sort of behavior.
Yeah, I think that, especially from like a college perspective, and even from, you know, like looking at professional like sports organizations and collegiate sports organizations and things like that, like there are stats that say that, you know, I think that if you're in a sorority, you're like 300% more likely to get raped by a fraternity member. The rates for violence against women and like the NFL and stuff like that are super, super high. And then also just like in my undergrad, and I've talked about this before, like our like really good sports teams, like there was so many assault complaints against the players and nothing would ever happen to them because
that's where
they
the money
were
is.
Athletes and they make the school money and like all this stuff. And I'm sure it's the same thing for like, you know, our football team at CU. So I think that
we don't know that for a fact, but I think it's just the same in a lot of sports. And like the thing specifically about fraternities is like Greek life, like when you're in Greek life at schools that care about it, which are the majority of universities, like you are put on a pedestal and it is this, you know, sort of quote unquote elite social group and you are with the brothers. And so, you know, if you have 40 guys living in a house that are throwing massive parties, like of course there's going to be sexual assault. Like why do you think the rates of sexual assault are so much higher at universities? It's because they have the environment to do sexual assault, commit the crime of sexual assault more often.
Yeah, I mean, if you're throwing a party in your house, okay, and it's a bunch of guys, you know, they're throwing a party in their house where they have their rooms right above, they have alcohol, and girls can show up, but if girls bring their guy friends can't come in. It's just the girls. So they're already vulnerable because of that. Mm-hmm. They're vulnerable because of alcohol, they provide the drinks, of drugging. And they're vulnerable because these men have like their bedrooms right at their fingertips. You know, they don't have to like drag them into an Uber or like walk them far away back to a dorm or whatever it might be. So there's a lot of things that are at their disposal. And I think that like something that has been really interesting is that like we're seeing these like really, really fucked up things year after year that are happening in frats. And I think that a lot of people make this argument of like, oh, well, in every institution, you're going to have a few bad apples that do bad things. And that's true. But this is one of those institutions that is enabling that even further. And I liked there's an LA Times article that we can link that it's an opinion article, but I do think that the things that they're saying are really, really spot on and really interesting.
Wait, even before you dive into that, I have a really brief story time. So 2 Halloweens ago, I was at a frat party and I wasn't a big frat goer in general. I just frankly didn't really like frat parties. I thought they were kind of lame. But I was at this frat on Halloween 2 years ago. And there was a shooting a few streets away from the frat house. So there was like a shelter in place order. So, you know, I'm literally locked, like at a lockdown inside a fraternity. And like for me, I just like stood there with my friend and we just like talked. Everything was fine. I made it home that night. But what I had learned was that a girl had been drugged and gang raped. And I was like, wow, you know, what's so crazy is that like this could have happened regardless of the lockdown because the rooms were right upstairs, but also like it could still happen during a lockdown. Like people were no longer outside in the front yard for this party. Like they were all inside, going up to their rooms, and then a woman was gang raped. Like, that literally happened, and like it was protected by the brothers. Like, the president of the fraternity made this big statement of like, this isn't true, like this didn't happen. But I'm like, they literally like protect each other at the fraternity because they're like, we are brothers, like we have your back, and like once you're initiated, like we are together forever, and like that whole thing. But I'm just like, fuck, man. Like, I could have been one floor below this woman who was getting assaulted, and like, I didn't know. And I'm sure brothers saw it happening and were like, oh, nice way to lay pipe,
Yeah.
Anyways,
that happened like I think a decade ago at my undergrad institution, and I'm gonna call them out because I don't give a fuck. But I went to Vanderbilt, and they had this whole thing with a football team. This group of guys on the football team gang raped a girl, and they filmed it.
That's gross.
They filmed it. Like, the guys that weren't gang raping her just stood there and filmed this girl getting raped.
That's really nasty.
And to even think that anyone could have any morsel in them that thinks that's okay. Like, what the fuck are we doing?
And it's like, okay. It's a cultural thing.
And then universities try to cover it up and brush it under the rug because they don't want to look bad. Mm-hmm. But you know what makes you look worse is when you cover it up and then it gets uncovered. Why don't you just like own your fucking shit? Mm-hmm. That's the only way that we're gonna be able to like attack these issues head on. But like, speaking of universities responding badly to sexual assault. Okay, so this LA Times article is about USC, University of Southern California, and I'm not saying this to pick on USC. Every fucking college is a problem. It's not just one. Like, every goddamn college is a fucking issue, and they don't do enough. And
when it comes to sexual assault.
Yes. Yeah. But in this case, this was from 2021, and students were pissed off at the school for how they were reacting and responding to sexual assault, and in specific to fraternities. And so USC students, fed up with the administration's failure, are calling for abolishing frats, as are students at many other universities nationwide. This has been a huge controversy. That idea of like, should we abolish Greek life or not? I'm sure it'll never happen because there's too much money in it, but it is something that some universities have done, which is, commendable.
We're like getting rid of quote unquote like the big problem fraternities.
Yeah. So it says, at the town hall, USC Provost Charles Zukowski seemed to not understand the systemic problem. I think that this is really key. And this is what I was talking about earlier. He insisted it is individuals who commit crimes. It isn't the entire organization. So he's failing to understand how fraternities in Greek life are enabling this like rape culture. And it's kind of just like denying any sort of ownership that fraternities could be liable for this stuff. They kind of did some like digging here, and they got emails from USC frat members where misogyny and racism were just like a common theme. And in these emails, it was Kappa Sigma members who were calling women beat bitches and slutty, disease-carrying tramps. Parties were described as sex markets.
Oh.
Come out, get drunk, and get your dick wet. They also included a lot of homophobic and racist slurs. So we're seeing how this culture is just being like fostered in these ways in fraternities.
And normalized as
well. And this is what's really interesting too. So they're talking to a woman, and they're talking about like Greek life, and it says like Greek life convention give fraternities more power than sororities to dictate where and how socializing happens. Sororities can't have parties. They can't throw parties. Only frats can.
In general?
Yes.
Because like our date dashes, sorry, neither of us were in Greek life, so that's another part of this. But so date dashes those are a sorority thing though.
Oh,
like they've like I think sororities do have parties, but in general the rules about like
alcohol
liquor and all
stuff.
of that are way more strict at sororities. Whereas like, before people are initiated into frats or during like rushing and all of that, a lot of the ways to get in are related to like how many beers can you drink and like hazing and all of that. Whereas for sororities, it's a lot more based on just like, are you hot?
Yeah. So if that like creates a like whole nother issue of like where these parties are happening and where people are getting fucked up, which are most common at frats. And this was a quote: "It creates a binary between men and women in which women are the prey. And as prey, women basically learn to view themselves as objects of sexual pleasure rather than independent human beings. This leads not only to rape culture, but to women not considering themselves to be victims after a case of harassment or rape." So now we're getting into that idea of blaming yourself. Classmate, 33-year-old USC alumna, recalls being raped at a fraternity party her senior year and telling herself to shrug it off. "You're kind of brainwashed, especially when you're a part of Greek life, to think all this is so normal. I thought it was my fault." You get punished for being sexually open or acting in a way they perceive to not be inappropriate. So that really induced a lot of shame. She internalized it, saying, like, "I'm a slut. That's just who I am." So it's just a woman that they were interviewing who went to USC. It kind of just like finished by, you know, saying that like all this is not just like about like a few bad apples that are in fraternities. It's about organization structure to dehumanize and endanger women at university sanctioned events. And then just like goes into a little bit more of just like the mistreatment of women in these areas. And kind of just that idea of a lot of times frats just get away with this, and when they get away with it, they learn that they can keep getting away with it, so they keep doing it to like connect into that. Kind of my first introduction into learning about how fucked up frats were when I was in high school, and I did a debate on if Greek life should be abolished, and I had like knew nothing about this, and I really didn't know a lot about sexual assault either, and I just like read this article that at Yale University, a frat went around in 2010 chanting, "No means yes, yes means anal. My name is Jack. I'm a necrophiliac. I fuck dead women and fill them with my semen." Ugh. And they went around the campus and chanted this, including in front of like the Yale Women's Center. Okay.
That's like, I'm sorry, but there's like being disrespectful and like gross, and then there's like doing it super openly. Like, I cannot imagine walking around campus saying something disgusting saying something as disgusting as that. Like, why are you so proud? Like,
yeah. Why are you so proud of the fact that you're disrespecting women and saying these things about them?
It's also just straight up fucking gross.
It's disgusting.
I'm a necrophiliac. Like, ew. Like,
yeah.
Anyways.
Well, so after this, the Yale Women's Center came out and said that this was an act of hate speech because it was an active call for sexual violence. And then they were criticized for that, which is really interesting.
And were they criticized by, like, the Women's Center was criticized by other things like on
media,
campus?
just
media
outlets.
In general?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I just, like, I think that's, like, really interesting. Like, we're criticizing the Women's Center for standing up and saying that this is not okay, instead of the Yale frat that was saying that consent is stupid, and if someone says no, that means shove your dick in their ass, and then saying that you fuck dead women. It's just like, it's a little bit mind-blowing.
I think any reasonable, mentally stable human would look at that statement and realize that that statement is not meaning good. Because if that's not hate speech, and if that's just okay, like,
what are we teaching society?
Well, that, but it's just like any person with their head screwed on straight would look at that statement and at least think, ew, or at least think like, oh, that's not great. Obviously, it's fucking awful, but whatever. I don't understand it.
But I think that, like, there are these actions and then nothing happens. I mean, this frat in particular, they finally did get kicked out the next year. Mm-hmm. But not after this happened. It took time for students to convince the administration that they needed to kick this frat off campus for doing this.
Like, it took an immense amount of effort. Like, yes. I'm pretty sure getting a fraternity kicked off campus is a lot of work. Like, it's a big fucking deal. So if students are coming forward and saying, hey, this is not good, it's not just 2 or 3 students. It's probably an exponential amount coming forward and saying that.
And this was in 2010. I will say it seems like a lot of universities are getting better at giving consequences, but this is still such a common problem. And like, it took until 2011. They were kicked off until 2016. The year that they came back, there were multiple sexual assault claims from the same frat. And a lot of women came forward. They talked about how the parties there were like meat markets. And then one guy actually did get in trouble for what they call engaging in penetration without consent. They don't even use the word sexual assault or rape. They say penetration without consent. That has how the university is defining this.
Yale University, just to clarify again.
Yeah. But even though he was like, quote unquote, found guilty, he wasn't even expelled. He was just kicked off campus for 3 semesters.
So he was suspended. And what's interesting is like universities, they can't legally like send anybody to jail. Like they do their own sort of investigation, right? They come to their own conclusions, but the precedent for evidence is significantly lower for universities. Like they don't need necessarily DNA evidence or all of that. They'll do an investigation, but what schools do have the right to do is to expel people. Like if you know that there is a lack of consent in a sexual experience and it's sexual assault and you're just like, oh, 3 semesters, he'll probably figure it out. Like what? Why wouldn't you like that? That really shows how not serious they take these issues. It's just 3 semesters. Okay. See you back in a year. Like,
yeah. And oftentimes like nothing even happens to them. Like women will even be like, can he not be in my class or can you put him in a different dorm? And I've heard a lot of times them not even accommodating that. Mm-hmm. And they're not even like asking for them to like get in trouble. They're just like, I don't want to see them every fucking day because they raped me. And there isn't any help with that. At Yale has been an issue with the same frat year after year after year after year. And then in 2019, the school decided to stop punishing them because clearly the punishments in the past haven't been doing anything.
I love that logic. You keep murdering people and we keep punishing you and you keep doing it anyways. So we're just going to stop giving you consequences.
Oh, not to mention the guy that got in trouble and kicked off was the president of this frat.
Oh.
So that's setting a really great precedent.
Okay, wait. So to recap, in 2010, there was the thing about the no means yes, yes means anal, necrophilia, ew, gross. There was that. Mm-hmm. And then women's organization was like, that's not cool. And everyone's like, oh, it's totally fine. And then in 2011, they get kicked off. Mm-hmm. And then they come back in 2016.
And then immediately get in trouble for sexual assault again. President of the fraternity
suspended for 3 semesters because they found him guilty of assaulting a woman. And then in 2019, that's what's next.
Yeah, they decided to not punish them, the frat, anymore. Also, when I say like punish, they're like, one of the punishments was like, you guys need to go through sexual assault training. Why hadn't they gone through sexual assault training to begin with? Why are we waiting until they commit the crimes to have them educated? Why are we not educating people in goddamn fucking middle school on this shit? Like we have sex ed and we don't talk about sexual assault.
At least like I didn't. Yeah. Like I remember I had I think 2 different health classes throughout like my middle school and high school career. One of them was in 8th grade and it was like a really small group of girls, and I specifically remember looking at a lot of pictures of like STIs, like this is what it looks like if you have chlamydia, this is what it looks like if you have AIDS, like here you go. But I don't remember a single conversation in that first health class about consent or lack of consent. But then the next set of health class, I remember it was like really focused on drugs. And the only thing that I learned about sexual assault as well as like actual sex was like how to put a condom on a man, I guess. How to put a condom on, and then if you have sex and you didn't want to, then that's assault or rape. But like, that was it. There wasn't like a conversation of like, this is how you give consent. This is how you don't give consent. It was just like, yeah, it's rape if you don't give consent. So like, that's not a good thing.
I really genuinely hope that like it has gotten better, and I don't know what sex ed in middle school looks like anymore, but if it hasn't, it needs to. And if it has, it's not good enough. There's no way it's good enough because this is so new. Like, these conversations we're just starting to have, but there's all these generations of people who have never had that education. And I also think about like our parents and stuff like that who, you know, this was never talked about ever at all. Like, these were not conversations that were happening in your friend groups, in your schools, in culturally, they just like weren't happening. We're finally having them now, which means that solutions are hopefully coming out of these conversations and prevention measures and things like that, but it's still so new. And if we aren't implementing these education systems throughout people's lives, it can't just start when you get to college.
Right.
It can't, because like at that point, like you're a pretty fucking fully formed human being, and like you have certain opinions, you know, you have a long way to go, but you have certain opinions and you believe certain things, and you've created a lot of those beliefs leading up to college. And so we have to ingrain in younger individuals what consent is, what sexual assault is, what that looks like, what that means, in order to ensure that when people grow up, then they know better. And like, this sounds so stupid. This might sound really stupid. I was having a conversation with a woman yesterday, and this was about the environmental world, okay?
Okay.
But I promise you, I have a point to this.
Okay.
Just bear with me.
I believe you.
But I was talking about how in order to ensure that people are passionate and care about the outdoors and the environment and protection and things like that, you have to bring them outside when they're kids. Not all the time, but oftentimes that's how you help foster care, because if they go outside, they experience the outdoors, they fall in love with the outdoors, they'll want to protect those places. And that's why I care about what I do, and that's why I care so much about environmental issues, is because like I grew up outside. I grew up skiing and climbing and all these things, and because of that I care so much. And we were talking about how there's been a huge issue with people going outside and then destroying the outdoors because they litter, they don't know how to clean up after themselves because they didn't grow up with that. They never learned leave no trace principles. They never learned any of that growing up. So when they go outdoors now, they abuse that privilege. And sounds weird, but it's the same thing. Like, if you don't grow up learning how to respect yourself, how to respect
the opposite gender,
if you don't have these conversations of like consent and sex and things like that, then you're going to grow up and you're not going to understand how to act. You're just not. And you're not going to have a sense of respect that maybe you should. You're not going to understand that it's important that your partner wants to have sex with you or wants to kiss you or whatever it may be. And those things should be practiced. And I think about like in high school, and you know, and you're so young and you're finally starting to like kiss people and like all this stuff. And I don't remember any boy ever asking if they could kiss me or asking if they could like take my pants off or my shirt. And you're like 16 years old, so like you don't really understand it either. But you should. Like, those are conversations that you should be having at that age. And like when you are 15, like you're young, but like people should be asking you if it's okay to kiss you or whatever it may be. And we just like don't learn that.
Yeah. We're so big on talking about like safe sex, use a condom, use birth control, pull out. But like, what about consenting to sex? Like, that sounds pretty safe to me. Like, why is it always just about the STDs and not about like wanting the sex in the first place or not wanting it? And something that I am pretty passionate about as well is, you know, teaching children about consent. Like, I'm talking young. I'm talking elementary school. I don't think we need to necessarily dive into STDs or anything like that, you know, at the age of 6. But what we should be teaching them is, what are your private parts called? None of this bullshit of like, this is your pee-pee, this is your hoo-ha, this is your dingle, whatever. Like, we should be teaching.
It's a motherfucking penis. Learn it.
Yeah. This is a penis. This is your vagina. One of the reasons that it's so important to have like the correct anatomical terms is because if somebody violates a child, they're not going to be like, oh, someone was touching my hoo-ha, and like you can probably infer what that is. But this way it's correct, and they can say somebody touched me, like touched my vagina, and it didn't feel good and it wasn't right. Like you have to first teach them what these body parts are, and that like it is up to you who touches them and who doesn't touch them.
This kind of like goes back to having your parents have these conversations with you, which a lot of parents don't really know or don't really understand or aren't really educated that it's important to talk to your kids about these things. And
it's uncomfortable.
It is uncomfortable for sure. But like, you know, I think about how like a lot of women are like shamed for being sexual, and we're like, or shamed for like masturbating or like things like that. And it's like, because from when we were like little kids, we were like told like, don't touch yourself there.
This is no square.
That's, yeah, like like that's not good. And so we're almost like taught like our body parts are off limits for ourselves to understand and to know and to love. And I think that's really weird too. And it's like, if you can't have those conversations with your kids, then they're going to grow up and it's going to be hard for them to talk about, you know, even just like saying the word vagina and like talking about your vagina and like having those conversations, or talking about sex and having those conversations with partners can be so hard because it's so foreign, because we didn't grow up like that and we were kind of shamed for it if we did talk about it. And I think that like plays into this. It's like, if we can't have conversations about sex with our partners or, you know, with our friends, how are we supposed to have conversations about sexual assault? Like we already get uncomfortable when people talk about sex.
Yeah.
So like obviously people are going to get uncomfortable when you talk about sexual assault. But that's just because societally, like we're ingrained to like default to that and to think that way, especially like as a girl. I would say a girl is sexual and has a ton of sex, like she's automatically like labeled a slut. Like we as society automatically place that shame and blame on girls growing up, and like even us in middle school, if a girl, you know, dressed provocatively, quote unquote, like we were taught to call her a fucking slut. Mm-hmm. Like how are we going to build women up if that's what we were taught and that was normal? Or like we listen to guys calling girls sluts, so then we think that's okay because a guy is saying it about a girl, and then a guy goes out and has a ton of sex and he's cool and we respect him.
Like, nice, brother.
And you're like, fuck yeah, dude. But it's like,
nice, yeah.
It's like, but like you fucked that one girl, but dude, she's a fucking slut, you know? And it's like,
and it's always, if someone gets an STD, it's always the girl's fault. Oh, she's so gross. Like, she is so gross. And yes, actually, like, women can carry STDs easier than men. Like, we contract them easier. But, like, had to get it from somewhere. You know what I mean? Like, why, once again, it's this thing of, like, oh, she's gross because she gave you chlamydia. But, hello, like, this is a thing. It happens. People get chlamydia. Okay, it's chill.
Yeah, dude, I've had chlamydia.
Haven't we all? Okay, circling back to this conversation about, you know, health class, men, women, we need to be having these conversations. And so, you know, we talked about consent. In order to talk about sexual assault, you have to know what consent is. Consent needs to be taught. In order to know what consent is, you need to know what your body parts are, which means we need to be teaching kids at a young age, this is what your no square actually means. This is why it's not okay for other people to touch you. Like, sexual assault, talking about it with children. And if we can start there, then maybe the conversation later on, you know, like, can be about respecting the other gender and then making them feel good. But you can't even like stress about making someone feel good until you know that it's okay for you to try.
Amen, sister friend.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think that was a good way of like putting it full circle, and also understanding that, you know, I think that if we build a greater understanding of what consent means and what it is, then you also build an understanding of what is consent not and what is not okay. And how does that filter into what sexual assault is, right? Like sexual assault is an act because of a lack of consent. But you can't even begin to understand what that means if you don't understand what consent truly means. And so I think that like you have to build those layers, and we have to as a society build those layers from a young age so that it is integrated into your life and into an education system as well. And so that then over time, like you're building those prevention measures, and people grow up understanding what consent is. So they grow up understanding that sexual assault is not okay. But a lot of men, and you know, women too, they sexually assault someone and they're like, no, I didn't. What are you talking about? Like,
it's
she
a
didn't
mistake
say
of fact.
No.
Yeah.
So they don't even understand that they've assaulted someone. And this happens a lot. Like I've read a lot of stories where the guy is like actually in genuine denial because he doesn't understand what he did.
Well, so I guess let's kind of define consent in general. Like, what is consent? So earlier we had said consent, you know, is an overwhelming, you know, enthusiasm for wanting to be a part of a sexual act of any kind. So what does that mean? It means body language. It means words. And, you know, I had said that enthusiastic consent is looking for the presence of a yes, not just an absence of a no. And so it's not just, you know, some eyes of like, I'm looking at you, so this means I'm consenting. No, it's a like, it is a head nod. It is a like being into it with the other person. It is a saying, yes, I want to do this. And then at the next stage of sex, it's, yes, I want to do that. Or, you know, and you can stop consenting at any point in time. And so, you know, it's also being in tune with your partner. That's incredibly important, is like, yeah, think about what feels good for you and think about what feels good for them. And what's going to feel really good is if they're doing something that both parties are happy and willing and like excited to do, not just like, oh yeah, I guess we'll maybe do that because it looks like he wants to do it. It's something that, you know, you're both looking forward to and you both want. But I kind of am getting ahead of myself. How do you know? That's the question, is how do you know when you have consent? What does that look like?
If someone's just lying there and they're not participating in the sexual act, you should fucking stop and have a goddamn conversation, because they probably don't want that. Well, even if they said they did, like, I know, especially women, we can be people pleasers and we will have sex just because the guy wants to, not because we want to. And we have all been there, and it's awful, and you don't even participate, and the guy doesn't even fucking notice because he doesn't even see you.
And then you're a starfish. That's what you're called. Oh, you didn't participate, so you're a starfish. Well, maybe she wouldn't be starfishing if she actually wanted to fuck you. Ever thought about that?
Yeah.
Or maybe she just doesn't understand like how to be a part of the sex. But how do you know if she doesn't want to be a part of it unless you talk to her?
Yeah.
Hey, I noticed you're not really participating in this. Are you feeling comfortable? Are you feeling uncomfortable? Is there anything I can do to make you feel more comfortable so that you are participating a little bit better?
Yeah. You need to have that awareness, understand, like, you know, maybe they didn't communicate that verbally, but they're definitely communicating that with their body language. And it's important to pay attention to that. And I have always just kind of assumed that guys, you know, they're just like in their own heads when they're having sex and they don't like pay attention to you. And that's just normal. That's just how it is. And that's just how it is when a guy and a girl have sex. But like, that is just not fucking true. And that's not how it's supposed to be. And I
not
feel like
all men
I
are
didn't
like
even,
that.
No, but that's
Yeah.
what I'm saying. Like, I feel like I didn't even learn that until like recently, when I've been with my partner, who like, if I'm not really feeling it, or if like I'm just like something's bothering me, or I'm just distracted, like he stops.
Yeah, because he's
Like,
in tune with how you're feeling.
Yeah, like I don't even have to say anything. He can just pick up on that and understand that, whoa, like we need to take a step back here. What's going on? Like, are you okay? Are you comfortable? And I think that like does take some emotional maturity and some time and things like that, but that's how it should be. And I think that like I grew up just like thinking that the guy can do whatever they want and they're going to be in their own heads, and like I don't really matter that much, and they're just, you know, trying to get one in. And it didn't, like, if I like wasn't feeling it, or if I wasn't engaging or participating, like I just defaulted to thinking that they're just like not going to notice, so it's fine. I'll just like lie here. I'll just like keep doing this because that's what they want.
You'll just hope they'll come soon.
Exactly.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. Sex is a complicated thing. Like, there's a lot of moving parts. There's like, you know, there's levels to it. There's expert, there's beginner, there's different things you can do. But don't let like all of those things take away from like okay, you know, you're going to learn to work up to certain sexual things. But something that you can also learn is how to be in tune with your partner's body. And being in tune can lead to better sex, as well as ensuring that you 100% have consent with your partner. So like you were saying, you know, my partner just stops when he senses that I am not comfortable, or that like something is a little bit off. And he probably got there because over time, you know, he's like paying attention to how you're feeling, and like he knows what's quote unquote normal for sex and what's not normal for sex. And that all takes practice. And so it's like being incredibly aware. And like I was saying earlier, not just thinking about yourself, but thinking about how your partner is feeling. Because a lot of sex should be about your partner, not necessarily just how you feel. If you're both thinking about how the other one feels, then you're both going to be happy. Mm-hmm. And it's going to feel good for everyone. Kind of just tied back to a little bit earlier about like lack of understanding what consent is, and like, you know, we didn't necessarily know what sexual assault was. Like, we had an idea, but it wasn't talked about a lot, so we each had our own views on it. Right after I was assaulted, when I called my friend, I said, I think I was raped. And the I think was probably related to some denial, some confusion, some shock, but it's also related to I didn't really understand exactly what rape was. I didn't fully understand how it would feel after.
I mean, yeah.
I didn't fully understand what consent is and how to give it versus not give it.
Yeah. I mean, you're preaching to the choir, man. Like, someone else had to tell me that I was sexually assaulted. Like, that doesn't feel great. And to think that I just lived in so much denial because I was like, that didn't feel right, but you know, guys can do what they can want to do. And so, whatever.
So, you know, we've talked about in previous episodes how denial is like a really big piece of your post-sexual assault reaction. But I wonder if denial would be less common if consent and sexual assault was talked about more in schools, in colleges, with parents.
Absolutely. I think the reason that we like survivors do put so much blame and shame and have that sense of denial is because those are not conversations we are having. We're not talking about sexual assault. We're not talking about consent. We don't know what that means. We don't know what it looks like. So then if it happens to us, we're like, what? Like, I don't really comprehend this. Mm. And then the conversations we do have are cover up. Don't drink too much, don't do this. And so those are ingrained in our brain of like, oh, well, if I dress revealing, then I'm asking for it. Or if I'm drinking, I'm asking for it. So then we grow up with those narratives in our head of that's how it is. So then if we were drinking or whatever it may be, then we blame ourselves because growing up we were told not to do that. And if we did that, then something bad would happen to us. And we did that and something bad happened. So it must be my fault. And those are the conversations we're having. Mm-hmm. That's why we're blaming ourselves. That's why we are denying things, because they're not talked about. They're brushed under the rug, and women have been blamed for decades and decades and decades and decades.
And from like a male perspective too, you know, I'm not a man, but it's the thing, like when men get assaulted, it's like, well, of course you wanted to have sex. You're a guy. You're always supposed to want to have sex. So like you couldn't have been assaulted, but that's not true. Like, but men are taught you should always want to have sex. And like men are built in a more sexual manner than women. Like that's like literally how they're designed. You know, that's why they get boners a lot more than we get wet. But, you know, like you were saying, the narrative for women is like, oh, well, if it happens, it's your fault. And like, we don't even have the conversations about like what sexual assault fucking is. And then for men, it's like, oh, sexual assault can't happen to you because you want sex. So you're never not giving consent because you always want to fuck someone or you always want to be fucked. But the missing piece here is, where is the consent? Where is the willingness? Where is the conversation of, I want to do this. I want you to have sex with me and I want to have sex with you. That's what it should be. Yes, I would love to do that. No, you know what? I'm actually not really feeling comfortable. Please don't tie me up that way. Or, you know, no, you can't kiss me. I'm so sorry. I just like, I'm not really feeling it today. Like, that should be the norm.
Yeah. And I think that especially when we're younger and like we're, you know, young teens and like kind of in that phase of our life, I think girls do think that they're just like supposed to have sex with the guy because that's what the guy wants to do. And that's another conversation that
lose
needs
your
to be had.
virginity. You're a nerd if you're not having sex.
Yeah. And then like a lot of people rush into sex and they're not ready for that. And so they just like agree to things that they don't want to do and they don't know how to have that conversation of consent. There's pressure. They fall into that pressure and like none of these conversations are happening.
Mm-hmm. Which is why we're having them. So to wrap it all up, we need to talk about consent so that we can have better sex. Consent is hot. It is hot. It is cool. It is sexy. You can use consent as also a way to make sure your partner is feeling good. For certain cultures in society that perpetuate this conversation of like sexually assaulting women, such as fraternities, such as, you know, sports teams. Don't fuck with that. Do not like that. That should change. What else did we cover?
That's why we're here, man. Looking at how we can utilize education in better ways to increase prevention as people get older and increase understandings of not just what consent is or sexual assault is, but also increase understandings of our own bodies and what respect means. And I think those are really important. And as parents, those are conversations that need to be had with like young kids and stuff like that. And that's challenging.
But think about how much better sex everyone will have if you are in tune with your partner, if there is consent, if you are paying attention to like what makes your partner feel good. Mm-hmm. Like consent will make your sex life better.
Yeah. Even if it's just a fucking one night stand. I don't care.
Yeah.
Have those goddamn conversations because frankly, like if I had a one night stand and like someone asked me those questions, I don't really know them that well. Maybe I've known them for a few days, but they like ask me those questions still. I want to have sex with them even more.
Yeah. And consent shouldn't just be this like reserved thing for just one night stands either. It should be reserved for
every
all
single
sorts
scenario.
Whenever
consent
you're
is
engaging.
a part of it.
Because you can't have sex without consent. Otherwise, it's just rape or sexual assault. Thank you guys so much for listening. We hope you guys enjoyed. Go ahead and send us an email if you have questions, comments, want to share your story at whattheydon'tsaythepodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram. We love you.
Boom shakalaka.
Catch you on the flip side.
Cheers.